Okay, so part one done. Moving on to part two as we try to figure out how to tackle the world's dumbest problems. I am Alexina Cather, Director of Policy Advocacy and Sustainability at the James Beard Foundation. And I am joined by Carissa Campeotto, co-founder and CMO at Trendi. Niyeti Shah, Social Impact Program Manager at WW. And Katy Franklin, Operations Director at ReFed. Thank you all for being here and continuing this important conversation. I do want to start with a similar question and ask you three where you think we should focus our efforts to reduce food waste. Do we name and shame the individual, or do we try to tackle the biggest culprits? What's the biggest bang for our buck? You can start, yeah.
Sure. So when we think about food waste as a complex problem, right? Every stage of the food cycle has different problems. At Trendi, I know our focus is rescue and capture at the early stage, so in farms and in food processors. And what we do in those areas is we take that otherwise wasted food and we turn it into a shelf-stable product so that it can be easily distributed at a later time and upcycled into amazing ingredients for other companies to use, as well as for our own products and for our furry friends too. So when I think about it, I really appreciate the early stage as well as the opportunity for consumers and retailers to have products that are then not going to go wasted because they're already shelf stable.
Great.
Yeah.
And I'd add in that, echoing some of the comments from the last conversation, that this takes a village. It's, our corporations have a monumental opportunity in the sense that they can impact their suppliers downstream as well as influencing consumers upstream, whether that's through messaging, through marketing campaigns, through working with upcycling companies, choosing which products they put on their shelves, choosing to have an upcycling store in every grocery store across the country. I know that's one of the goals of the Upcycling Food Association. But then we also need investors. We need policy. I know you're going to bring that into the conversation, so I won't hit on it too hard. But then consumers have to take action too. The bulk of food waste happens at the consumer level. It's about 40% takes place with us. We are not kind of, free of, needing to take action here. And we need to become aware of it and need to understand what we can do. So we need partners to help us on that journey. And so whether it's someone like Trendi who educates through that product distribution, or consumer education campaigns, or even just from our retail partners who are giving out good food and good recipes. I love the Cooking Connection corner at HEB. I'm a big fangirl of HEB. But I think it really does take everyone, including partners like Google, who might not seem like that traditional partner, but it really is everyone. And I think it's more about lifting all of our partners up as opposed to kind of naming and shaming, because I think that causes people to retreat as opposed to empowering them to say, I want to be a part of the solution and I see the incentives for me, because these are mutually beneficial opportunities, whether it's financial, whether you care about the environment, there's something in it for everyone. And it's okay if it's a financial motive.
Right.
That's okay.
Right. Whatever it needs to be, it's totally fine as long as we get people to start moving the needle.
Absolutely, and I think that non-traditional partner piece is probably a great example for WW, because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, why on earth is WW on this panel talking to me about food waste? But the truth is, for us, right, we think about food all the time at WW, and we recognize that we have a role to play in the food system. We engage with behavior change and how people eat every single day. And when it comes to this question of who should we bring into the conversation, it's saying, okay, we play a role in the food system. What's the way that we can get involved? We're not a traditional partner, but we have millions of members who can lead the conversation. We can take a stand and move forward. And I think that's really where the opportunity is bringing everybody into the conversation and showing that whether you produce food or not, this is still your problem that you have to deal with.
I agree. So I think we talked a little bit about this. Like, some people care about food waste from an environmental perspective. That's an easy one for us to think through. Some, it's economic. I mean, if you are throwing away food, like the average household, it's I think up to $2,000 a month. So that's significant, right? And then for others, it's a humanitarian response. You know, everybody's thinking of, well, there are hungry people in the world. It makes you feel guilty. But I think sometimes it's hard to make that connection. Like, if we reduce food waste in our own home, how does it help with food insecurity? Is there actually some way that it's connecting to people who need food? Katy, that one might be for you.
So there's, you can get into some real macroeconomic theory here.
Let's do it. No.
So, if you really think about relieving our food system is operating, some people think of it as operating incredibly efficient because of the way that it gets food to people, and in that really efficient operation, we lose 35% of our food along the way. That's one way of looking at it. But if we relieve that strain of 35% loss, theoretically, there would be impacts on things like food prices. There could be impacts on how food gets redistributed around the country. So from, again, these really kind of theoretical macroeconomic places, there are ways that research shows that we could relieve pressures on our food system to where food is not getting to the people that it needs to be. Now, if you don't buy that extra pineapple in the store, or you choose to eat it instead of letting it rot in your fridge, there may or may not be a direct connection. At the grocery store level, maybe more so, because they have more opportunities to have a partner come pick it up and get it donated. From your home, it's a little bit harder. You might have fewer options for kind of like a B2B donation solution. So it gets a little tricky. It also depends on where you are and what kind of solutions have available to you. But we have over almost 1,000 organizations working across this country on food prevention, rescue, and recycling. There are so many organizations that are moving food in good ways, whether it's upcycling, whether it's food rescue and kind of redistribution, whether it's educating people on things. But the simple answer is that if you buy more than you're going to eat, you're not doing good things for our food system.
Right. And kind of pivoting a little bit to talk to you, Carissa, your company builds robotic solutions to combat food waste. So there are so many things going on, from smart fridges to new peels on avocado, apps, this, that. It's really exciting, and it's easy to get excited. But how are these innovations really moving the needle?
Yeah. I mean, I think that when you look at the retail and the consumer level, these, saving the avocados, and having these diversion programs of taking product maybe that was wasted in a grocery store and getting it to a low-income community that really needs that food, that's all great. But when we look at what I've noticed, at least in the industry, is that we're not looking at food waste on what's the largest available amount of waste that is upcyclable. Because as you go down the line, and the further you go down the line, the more difficult it is to upcycle that product. Like that food that's on your plate that you're not eating, that food can't go back to humans. Right? So for us, our focus is always on the early stage, because we're able to capture the most amount of product in one SKU of that product. And then we have so much versatility in its upcycling opportunities. And what I really appreciate about our focus is we're concerned about the nutrient density of the food, so that the nutrients can feed the people for the future, instead of that product, going to the pigs. Like when you take, excess food or misfit fruits and vegetables on farms, that food is sometimes going to pigs, and that truck of carrots is being sold to go to the pigs for $70, essentially what the transport cost of that product is. But when you go and take that food and upcycle it into something for humans, now the grocery store has got good, cool products that they can market and show they're being sustainably responsible. And the consumer is saying, hey, I'm eating food on the earth that was already there. I wasn't asking somebody to produce more for me, and I'm buying that. I'm buying the food that we need to eat first. And I think if we can, all work together. But on the consumer and the retail level, these small, different programs that are being developed right now, And not only small ones, large ones as well. They're extremely impactful. Like I was saying earlier, food waste is so complex. The solutions that we're building in the earlier stages are not the solutions for the later stages. And so it's really about that community of people all working together in synergy. And, that's what I really appreciate about the efforts of ReFed is, you are bringing that community together. So.
Yeah, so Katy, you do a lot of work on data and insight at the big level to provide data to show where we need to focus our efforts, right, around food waste and making things actionable. Can you talk about the scale of the problem of food waste and along the supply chain where you see the opportunities for the most innovation?
Sure. So about 35% of food is kind of unsold, uneaten, and the majority of that is just straight food waste, meaning it doesn't get recycled, it doesn't go to donations. And where that happens is about 20% on farms, 15% in manufacturing, 30% in consumer-facing food businesses, so restaurants, retail, and then about 40% in our homes. And so it happens everywhere along the supply chain, but as you can see from that breakdown, a lot of that takes place in our homes. So there's so much opportunity for innovation in our homes in terms of, in a category that we think of as reshaping consumer environments. There's a lot of interesting opportunity for innovation there. And I really loved what I think Emily was mentioning in the last conversation, that innovation doesn't just have to be sexy, expensive, inaccessible technology. It can be equitably accessible innovation. It can be business model innovation. It can be process innovation.
Policy.
It can be teaching people how to cook differently. It can be rethinking how do we distribute food along with recipes. How do we take into consideration food distribution programs that think about, I live in New York City, some people aren't able to run their ovens because it's so damn hot and they don't have AC. So how do you take that into consideration and make sure that people have the knife skills, the products that they need to produce the food that they're given? And how do you incorporate all of that information into and cater to people? And so innovation in the home is a really big space that there's opportunity. At the retail level, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening with inventory management, markdown pricing apps. We've got some Appeal avocados over in the back with different barrier coatings. There's a lot happening in food service as well as in restaurant with whole product utilization. Thinking about, before, maybe a couple of years ago, nobody was touching carrot tops. Now carrot top pesto is the hottest thing in the world.
Right.
And, all these amazing things that it just takes a little bit of creativity. I didn't have home ec in school, and I didn't get taught all these, ways to interact with my food in creative ways that I could just kind of, get funky with it. And we've gotten so far away from that, and even that kind of creative and innovative thinking is needed nowadays. And whether it's Instagram or TikTok, bring it back. Bring that back to, the youths. I think we're all youthful.
There are some that are younger than us, but yes.
But and then even, you're talking about robotics as well, on the farm, and I heard some of the people on the interim speaking, thinking about how we can be leveraging drones for smarter application of pesticides or integrated pest management, better crop management, so that we know what we're harvesting, when harvests are ready to be picked up. And like Emily was talking about, make sure that people know that when celery is grown and produced, a third to half of a celery is cut off so that you get this beautiful celery heart in the grocery store. That's not what celery looks like when it grows. Take us back to what food looks like. And I think so many people would love that and really get into that.
Right. It shouldn't be such a novel concept, but take us back to what food actually looks like. So happy we touched a little bit about process innovation. I do want to talk with you, Niyeti, a little bit about policy innovation. I know WW was involved in the Emerson bill. Can you share with everybody who might not know what that is and why it's important to food waste?
Yes, absolutely. So in 1996, there was a piece of legislation passed called the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act, or the Emerson Act. And it was passed with bipartisan support to provide legal liability protection to organizations looking to donate foods to a nonprofit. And while this legislation was extremely successful and has been a wonderful tool to facilitating these donations, it's kind of brought up some unintended side effects. So not only has the food donation space changed pretty drastically since 1996, but the language was a little bit vague and not necessarily offering clear guidance, to the point that a lot of organizations right now don't donate food because they don't think that they're protected from a liability perspective. And so their lawyers are telling them, absolutely not. You cannot donate this food. You have to dump it instead. And so what we've been working on at WW and the Healthy Living Coalition, which is a coalition we founded with nonprofit, for-profit, and academic partners, is thinking like, how can we leverage all of these amazing community members that we have to change this legislation, which seems like pretty obvious. I don't think anybody is really against making that shift. And so what we've been doing is we authored an open letter to Congress in November with 28 partners. We started a petition on change.org that has over 40,000 signatures, and we supported the introduction of bipartisan legislation in both the House and the Senate. And that piece of legislation is called the Food Donation Improvement Act, and it targets creating guidelines for how to donate food safely, which I think people are like a little surprised that doesn't exist already, which is a little crazy. And it also allows for organizations trained in food safety, like restaurants and schools, who during the pandemic became the backbone of emergency food systems. It gives them legal liability to protect themselves when they make those donations, which is something that, probably should have happened a long time ago.
Right, so important, and so much work still to be done in that space. I mean, this is just a little tip, but it's a start and it's great. We talked a little bit about this in the first panel, but food labeling and the dates, Best Buy, Goodbye makes you Healthy Buy, it's just so confusing and they're arbitrary. So how can we educate consumers a little bit better about when something is actually going to kill them?
Well, first of all, we need to make the switch to standardized date labels.
Right.
So when we started on this work...
And I just want to pause for a second. Does everybody know that we actually don't have that?
So currently there are about 30 different types of labeling language used across products. Best Buy, Used By, Fresh Buy, Tastiest Buy.
And who makes those decisions?
Manufacturers, marketing teams. A lot of times they are even just meant to be communications between a manufacturer and a retailer. So sometimes they were never even intended for us consumers to see, and therefore for us to try and interpret. And so when we looked at this in 2016, I think we saw 27 or 30 different types of labels out there. And worked in, as was talked about before, there is broad commitment to this two-label system for standardization. There's a decision tree for everyone to understand, when do I use which label, the quality or the safety label. And we're seeing about 30% adoption across industry to switch to those labels, most commonly on independent store brands, so like the Central Market brand if you're at Central Market, or like the Kirkland signature if you're at Costco, those types of brands. Some of the challenges with getting those switched over are that you also had nutrition guidelines change in 2019. And so everyone was like, oh, well, wait, let's wait till we change our nutrition guidelines, because it all involves repackaging and reprinting packaging, and no one's gonna run a reprint just for date labels, or they're not gonna recalibrate their can stamping machine just for the date labels. So there have been some holdups, but we have had broad commitment from the Food Marketing Institute, the Consumer Brands Association, the global entity, the Consumer Goods Association. I'm getting the names wrong. Too much alphabet soup. But we've had broad industry commitment to it, and now it's about getting those labels switched. So that's one step, is you've got to get the right labels in. And then you have to educate people, because then us consumers are still going to be like, okay, great, there's still a label. What do I do with that? And we might not all be so bold as Emily Ma to trust the taste sniff test, although there is a a retailer in the UK, Morrison's, who is moving strictly towards the sniff test. I encourage you all to check that out. We're seeing, I love leading behind the folks over in the UK, but it's got to take education. And some people may never get there. I still know people who are like, 5 days before, I'm throwing it out. That's my family rule.
Right.
Live by it. But it's going to take a lot of consumer education, and I think that's going to mostly need to come from the sellers of the products themselves to help educate, and whether that's helping with printing on the packaging, with in-store marketing, things like that.
And just to add a little bit on that, I think when it comes down to education, where we need to focus so many of our efforts, whether it's on the grocery sort of consumer level, is really building unique marketing campaigns, ones that are edgy and they're fun. Not just a little poster in the grocery store that says, do a sniff test, and there's like 1 to 10, step 1 to 10. And I think when we think about marketing, and I'm the CMO of Trendi, so I'm always thinking about marketing. But I think if we take a little bit more of an edgy, fun approach, like a lifestyle brand, because reducing food waste is a lifestyle. It's not something you do one day. It's something that you need to do to live and breathe every day, especially in order for all of us to work together and accomplish this problem.
Can we make a choose your own adventure book that has scratch offs?
Yeah. I love it. Now we're thinking outside the box. So we have a few more minutes left on the panel. I just want to ask each of you what technology you think is missing to really move the needle on food waste, and keeping in mind of how to make it affordable and equitable for everybody, so that it's not just this really fancy smart fridge or robot that does something special around food waste, but so that the average consumer can have this in their household and use it on a daily basis.
I can take a jump in first. I think the technology piece is really important, and we've seen how it's pretty much revolutionized the food waste space. But from my perspective, I actually think it's more about, are we creating policies and creating an environment where we are supporting these technologies, where we are encouraging them to be equitable, to be accessible to all people. And I think until we kind of make that shift for an environment that allows those things to happen, I don't know that technology is going to be able to solve it all, or that we're really giving it a fair chance to advance the problem.
Right.
This might not be what you expected, but I think it's a highlighter or a pen so that people can save their receipt, circle or highlight what they didn't eat or what got wasted that week, and then plan better.
That seems equitable.
For me, it would be a software that centralizes our entire food system. And I know there's some techie people in the audience, so, but there's the disruption of our food cycle and the lack of communication within it, I think, is a big part of the overall problem. And I know there are certain different companies out there trying to centralize and do that, but I think we need to look at it from a global approach, kind of how we did with the pandemic. And I don't want to bring up C-19 too much in our conversation, but if we would take the same effort we did as battling C-19, I think, and applied that to food waste, I think we would all get there a lot faster. And to watch those numbers decrease as we do it would be beautiful. So
if you're on Data is Beautiful on Reddit, get on it.
So in our last minute or so, you talked about having some kind of a snappy campaign. Now we're going to do a scratch and sniff campaign. Any last thoughts about messaging, in terms of food waste? Is there a campaign that we need to do with kids, that make them guilt their parents into it? There's been a lot of success with smoking cessation and seatbelt wearing and all that. What messaging? What else?
Well, no, you start.
You're the CMO.
Well, okay, so I'm not sure if you've seen it or not, but we have a whole fuck food waste campaign in a parking lot on 7th Ave, Nick. And that's been our campaign since we started. It's very in your face. It's not very institutional friendly. We get in trouble all the time, but that's part of it, right? We're trying to be unique, and that would be my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I think we can all appreciate that, and maybe we just end on that. I might not repeat it because I owe my children $1 every time I say a 4-letter word. But thank you all so much for this conversation, and thanks to our first panel as well. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.